Today, my guest is best-selling author Vince Flynn. We will be talking about his just-released novel from Atria Books, Pursuit of Honor. He has written 10 before this, 10 can't put them down political thrillers, and I'll be talking to him from Minnesota, where he makes his home. Vince, welcome to the show. Knowing your book tour schedule, I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me on the show, Jacqueline.
Well, we're just very pleased and honored. Now, your new book, Pursuit of Honor, follows where your last book, Extreme Measures, left off. The first question I think my listeners would like to know is, did you start writing this book immediately after the last one, and how long did it take you to complete it?
I wish I had started writing it immediately after. The problem is I'm relatively young for a writer. I'm 43, so I have little kids, and I end up finishing these books usually the very beginning of August, the first week or so. And then I end up, having to edit and get my kids ready to go back to school.
Oh, yes.
And then in today's day and age, getting your kids ready to go back to school is a much bigger deal, and they've got fall sports, and the girls have dance, and, and so then I feel guilty because I'm going to start touring in October. So I pretty much don't do a thing other than try to, be a good dad and a husband for about that next 2 months. And then the other thing is the last 3 months that I'm under deadline, I'm really bad about answering emails and opening up mail. And I typically have to dig out from under a pile of information and I'm doing it right now. I start touring next week, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well,
but I wish I would have. And I'll tell you something different about this book. I have never, in all of my years of writing, read any of my own novels.
Uh-huh.
This was the very first time, because it was so many details were important that I get right. Now, Pursuit of Honor is a standalone book. You can pick it up, you can read it, and you won't be lost in any way.
And it was a great book.
Well, thank you. But I had to remember so many details because this plot was so intricate in this one.
Yes.
That for the first time, I went back and I reread one of my own novels.
Oh, did you enjoy it?
I did.
Good.
I laughed. There were times where my heart was racing.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I typically don't go back and read it is, I think like a lot of artists, you have a hard time revisiting your own art because you want to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's often not discussed enough that one of the benefits of having a deadline every year is that you can't do too much damage to your own book.
Well, that's good to hear.
You
Yeah.
have to walk away from it because it's the old. They say that one of the hardest things for a young sculptor, to learn is when to put down the mallet and the chisel and walk away from it.
Yes,
because you eventually you'll go too far and you'll ruin it.
Well, that Pursuit of Honor was published in October 2008 and was a New York Times bestseller. And I have to say, I read that, I think, in 48 hours. And I think everybody else...
You mean Extreme Measures?
I'm sorry, Extreme Measures. Yes, sorry.
I confuse them sometimes, too, Jeff.
Yeah, well, I just finished this morning the last page of Pursuit of Honor, and that was enjoyable, too. But Extreme Measures, let's clarify, that was published in October 2008 and was a New York Times bestseller, and it was really good.
This one, Jacqueline, this book, I think more than any book I've written, I was really, it was so Lacare Ludlum at the end. I have never been this excited the way everything came together, because what I used to do, I used to outline the entire novel.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found out after 4 books is that invariably I always come up with a better idea.
Well, good.
And so what I've started to do is I only outline about the first 100 pages.
Uh-huh.
And then what I find is as I sit down to write the story, certain characters take on a more important role and other characters become less interesting and they kind of fade away. And The interesting byproduct of that is that if I don't know how the book's going to end, it's highly improbable that the reader's going to know how it's going to end.
Right. Well, let me say this, too. You have many fans here, having appeared at our Northern Trust Desert Literary Society, so we've all been waiting for it. And but for those who might not know you, give my audience just a little background on what your books are about, because we've got a lot of things that we want to know about you, so we'll go through the questions now. So tell my listeners, what are your books about?
Well, I'll say that I was a child of the 80s. I graduated from high school in 84 and in college in 88. And it was an interesting decade in the sense that a lot of things were happening. Chief among them was the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And also during that time, I saw, and I don't know why exactly I saw this. I think it was because Pan Am Lockerbie.
I'm sorry, we've just lost you. Are you there, Vince?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. We lost the last thing you just said. If you could repeat that, please.
Sure. What I said was, Pan Am Lockerbie was a big event in my life, along with a lot of other terrorist attacks. And I kind of saw, as the Soviet Union was waning, I thought the next big problem was going to be Islamic radical fundamentalism and terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So when I sat down to write my first book in '92, I looked at it as a fan. I was young. I saw Grisham. I saw Clancy. They were a great source of motivation for me in the sense that I think they're immensely talented, very different, and they were both soundly rejected by every publisher in New York City. And so I looked at that and I thought, you know what? As a reader, I would like a book, because I saw Grisham's books getting lighter and lighter.
Mm-hmm.
It's still fantastic, but I think a little lighter, a little shorter. And I saw Clancy's books getting longer and longer. And I thought, as a consumer, I would like somebody who writes with the pacing of Grisham and the dialogue of Grisham and has about 1/4 the technical detail of Clancy. And that's what I went after. And I think almost by accident, and I'm very honored with this comparison, I'm often compared to Robert Ludlum.
That's interesting.
And he's probably my favorite author of, at least in my genre, because I think Robert had a real gift for telling a true espionage story, but making it very cinematic, very action, fast-paced, and believable, which is important in this business. Some people like to read Clive Cussler's and stuff like that, where it's a little, it's based in the here and now, but it's also a little over the top and a little fantasy, and that's fine, very entertaining. But for me, I write what I enjoy to read.
Well, and that's why you're so popular. I mean, we have to say that. And as you've mentioned, through your books, you've become known for your research and warnings about the rise of Islamic radical fundamental terrorism. And it's read by presidents, foreign heads of states, intelligence professionals around the world. And I'm going to make a quote here, is that one high-ranking CIA official was quoted as telling his people, I want you to read Flynn's books and start thinking about how we can more effectively wage the war on terror. So why do you think you've struck this chord in readers and in official people?
Well, it's interesting because I've been forced to think about this a lot lately with the current climate on Capitol Hill.
I was going to ask you about that, so why don't you combine the two?
I think what has happened is, as a country, we all seem to get the idea. There's some general truths out there, and one of them is that about 90% of us really admire the men and women in uniform,
right,
who are out there fighting this war for us. And about 90% of us think that politicians on both sides of the aisle are self-serving egomaniacs who will often put their own career, their own party, in front of our national security. And I use this old fable in Extreme Measures, and you might remember it, Jacqueline. I talked about the frog and the scorpion.
Yes.
And it's such a poignant story because I think it so perfectly represents what a lot of senators did after 9/11 for that next year or two, and what a lot of congressmen did. And in this example, the politicians on the Hill are the scorpion, and the men and women at the CIA are the frog. And in the old fable, the scorpion says to the frog, "Give me a ride across the river." And the frog says, "No, I'm not going to give you a ride across the river, because once you get on my back, you're going to sting me and kill me." And the scorpion says, "Why would I do that? Then we'd both drown." And of course, halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog, and they begin to drown. And the frog says, "Why?" And the scorpion says, "Because I know no other way." Mm-hmm. And in the years after 9/11, we had a lot of these people who are now critics of the CIA. And your listeners should understand this. I do an intense amount of research, and I have a lot of contacts in Washington. I've checked my sources on the political front and at Langley and at the FBI, and I have been told emphatically that the people who are the biggest critics of rendition and waterboarding and all these other measures were briefed fully. They were briefed fully what the CIA was doing at the time. In fact, the Speaker of the House, who hails from California, I have been told, said to one briefer, "Are we doing enough?" Because as some of us now know, that Sheikh Mohammed did not talk originally. We had him in custody for over a month, and then we finally began to use some enhanced measures, and he began to speak. And they had questioned, "Are we doing enough?" Well, flash forward another couple of years, the political climate has changed, and now they want to go back, turn back the clock, and begin to investigate these guys. Well, and it's just, it boggles the mind.
Well, let's talk about you as a writer, as we said, who writes about terrorism and individuals within a fictionalized government and agencies. I mean, there are these agencies, but you are fictionalizing them, but taking certain truths, and you have a particular point of view. Now, how will the focus or tone change, if at all, due to the new administration's policies? As with you as a writer, not as a person who feels a certain way about policy, but as a writer.
Yeah, you phrased that very well, Jacqueline, because I am cognizant as an entertainer that I don't like it when Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn go on television and espouse their personal political viewpoints. And it pains me because I think the three of them are phenomenally talented actors, especially Sean Penn. And I really, it's made it hard for me to enjoy certain movies because they just can't keep their, what I would call, very radical viewpoints to themselves. Now, what I won't do is I will not enter the healthcare debate in a public forum, because I'm not a healthcare expert. I write about terrorism, I write about national security, so you will hear me be critical of this administration on issues like that. But you'll notice in the book, I made a conscious decision while I was writing this book to downplay the role of the executive, because I didn't want to make this book about this president and his policies and whether I agree with them or disagree with them. That's not what I want to do, because I have a lot of readers who, let's just say, are left of center.
Well, and I think you've got readers on both sides of the aisle too.
Absolutely, yeah. I have readers on both sides, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to spoil this experience for them, because many of them like the man. And if I go out and I do that, I'm going to ruin their experience. They're going to have wasted $27. And I don't need to do that. Now, it's not to say that, you finished the book already, so you know that there are some controversial passages in this book. I'd love to talk about one of them.
Well, why don't you hold on with that thought, because, and remember too, by the time this is broadcast, you're going to be on tour. Vince, we were about to talk to a little segment in your book that's rather interesting, and I had a question for you about it. As a matter of fact, you were about to bring it up anyway, but I'm glad you're ready to talk about it. There is a character in your new book that resembles a certain California senator, and I know your books are fiction, but did you have someone in mind when you included similar verbiage in this character?
I did, but you're not going to get me to say her name.
I think we've said what we had to say.
But I will say this, and again, this figures directly into an area of national security.
Exactly. I thought it was very well placed.
And so here, you know, and we'll be able. I'm just going to have to say her name because I'll come about this in a slightly different angle. I have been known for my prescience in these issues. How these terrorists will attack us, the type of things they'll do, the way we'll react as politicians in a country and the military, CIA, stuff like that. I sat down after 9/11, literally that day, and was like much of us was very saddened. But my mind raced so quickly ahead. What made me sad, in addition to the loss of our fellow countrymen, was the fact that I knew where this was going to go. I knew that we would begin to turn on each other. I knew that politicians would act like politicians always do and try to make political hay out of this on both sides of the aisle, and that we would eventually probably tear each other apart, and we wouldn't be strong enough to do this in the long run, to do the nasty things that you must do if you're going to combat something like this. And the one thing I could have never predicted is that Dianne Feinstein would have been placed in charge of the Senate Intelligence Committee in the real world. I just could never ever have imagined it. I didn't think it was possible that we would do that. The morale of the men and women at the CIA is really, it's not very good right now.
I don't imagine.
They've driven away many of the good young men and women who were risk takers. And the honorable men and women who are still there are trying their darndest to keep us safe. But we have gone back to a near identical reset to the months prior to 9/11. And that CIA is now becoming afraid to talk to the FBI because they're being investigated. And hypocrisy rules the day. And that's that chapter I'm rather fond of in the book, where Rapp is being excoriated for being a barbarian because he has dislocated the shoulder, allegedly dislocated the arm of a terrorist, and these senators are telling him how big of a barbarian it is.
Right.
And Rapp stops and draws the comparison. He says basically, this esteemed body, at least a fair number of you on the panel, have voted over 30-plus times for federal funding for late-term abortion. And he asked the senator in the book, "What do you think God is going to think is a more barbaric act? Dislocating the arm of a man who has intentionally snuck into this country so he can kill civilians, or sticking a spike into the brain of an 8.5-month-old fetus and sucking his brains out?"
Well, now, Mitch Rapp, the protagonist that you're referring to, who's now in all your books, wasn't in your first book. In which book was he introduced in? Do you remember?
Transfer of Power.
I'm sorry?
Transfer of Power. Transfer of Power.
Transfer of Power. He's featured, of course, in all of your books, and I think your readers, including myself, would be disappointed if he wasn't featured anymore. Give us a little overview about him and how he developed as a character and why you think he is such a popular figure.
Well, a lot of this started with Rapp as my guy, who I was sitting there when I started writing these books. First one, 92, was Term Limits, and then I actually started working on Transfer of Power in 94 as a follow-up to it. And at that point, I was hot on the trail of Islamic radical fundamentalism, and I was thinking to myself, we need somebody. We need somebody like this who's going to go out and take it to the bad guys before they take it to us. This idea of targeted assassination, something that I strongly believe we should have done to the likes of Osama bin Laden prior to 9/11. We didn't as a country because we didn't have the political will to do it. So Rapp, I figured in the real world, where would you get a guy like this? It has to be somebody who's highly motivated. And I turned to that event that affected me in my college days, which was the downing of Pan Am Lockerbie flight. And I came up with Mitch Rapp, this guy who was a student at the University of Syracuse, and Syracuse University lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 students who were returning for Christmas break, who had been studying overseas on that one plane alone. And Rapp kind of became the guy, our tip of the spear, our guy who was angry that his girlfriend had been on that plane, who had been recruited by the CIA, trained by the CIA to become a very lethal assassin who was swarthy enough to fit in the Middle East and become one of the enemy and walk among them and begin to kill them one by one. And, of course, he hasn't gotten through this thing unscathed either. He's come out of it with lots of disappointment and heartache, and at one point someone very near to him again is killed. And, he's a character I have really enjoyed writing and have had just a lot of fun with.
And I know you're asked a lot whether any of his character is based on you, yourself. How do you answer that?
I got an interesting question last year that really caught me off guard. A guy said to me, "How are you and Rapp? A lot, how much of Mitch Rapp is you?" And I said, "Well, not that much. I'm 6'2", and I've got thinning brown hair that's going gray, and Rapp is, he's 6'1", and he's got thick black curly hair, and he looks like he's Middle Eastern, And the guy said, "Let me rephrase it. How many things do you and Mitch Rapp disagree on?" And I thought, holy cow, the guy just, he nailed it. Mitch Rapp and I disagree on very little.
Yeah.
So, physically we don't look a lot alike, but I think mentally we are extremely similar.
Well, I want to talk about that too, and the popularity of him is the fact that we'll jump to October 2007, and that marked another milestone in your career when your ninth political thriller, Protect and Defend, became a #1 New York Times bestseller. And a few months after that, you signed a deal with CBS Films, who optioned the rights for your Mitch Rapp character, with the intention of creating a character-based action thriller movie franchise. What does that involve, and how far along is that?
What that involved was a 4-book deal and movie rights for the Mitch Rapp franchise. And we are very fortunate. We got Lorenzo de Bonaventura and Nick Wexler to come on board as producers. And they are two very successful producers in Hollywood. They hired Jonathan Lemkin to write the script. In fact, right before we talked, I was editing the script, and I've got to get through that and send it back out there. And they are on the verge, we think, of hopefully greenlighting it and going out and hiring some actors and directors and get this thing made, which would be really exciting.
Has it gone as far as discussing who might play the Mitch Rapp character?
Oh, yes.
Can you give us a few hints, or do you have to keep that quiet?
There's been a lot of names thrown around. The one thing I've learned during this process is to take none of it seriously.
I know, but give us a few hints.
Well, we've had everybody from Denzel to Will Smith, which presented a unique situation because Mitch Rapp isn't black.
Right.
But these are two of my favorite actors who I think actually could pull it off. And they would also politically neutralize the film a little bit, or insulate it, I should say, from some of the criticism that it might get otherwise. Beyond that, every name you can imagine has been bantered around, from again Brad Pitt to Gerard Butler to Eric Bana to the new actor from Mad Men, John Hamm. It's been all over the board. So it'll be interesting to see where it turns out. I, for one, would rather have a fairly, a good actor who looks swarthy, who won't be afraid to play a controversial role, and someone who ideally is not as well known, so he can become Mitch Rapp. If you take a superstar and have him play Mitch Rapp, it's simply Brad Pitt playing Mitch Rapp.
Right, but you've got nothing to say about it, have you? I mean, that's basically all up to the film people.
I'll be honest. I would be honored and extremely fortunate if Brad Pitt, wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. He's one of the best, hottest actors out there, and so you just go with it.
Well, we'll all look forward to seeing who that's going to be. I want to back up a little bit too and talk about your early life, and we haven't really talked yet about your personal story. And I'd like you to tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came to this point of being a writer. But you had a very specific problem in school that would make people think twice as to whether or not you could become a successful writer. And why don't you tell my listeners what that problem was?
I grew up dyslexic, the fifth of seven kids, and fortunately, at a young enough age, and I was on the leading edge of this. Or at least I was part of the leading edge of this. I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and I started taking SLBP classes when I was in grade school, but I really hid from it. I hid from the written word. I was really embarrassed by it. Didn't want to admit that I had the problem. I wanted to hide it. And, of course, this created a series of very embarrassing situations for me as a kid. I never got better than a C in an English class in high school or college. But then really embarrassing things happened in college, and I promised myself that I would begin to go back and teach myself how to read and write. And it was interesting. It kind of happened with Robert Ludlum and Trinity by Leon Uris, that I unlocked that door and just found what is without a doubt my greatest hobby, which is to read. I just love to read, and it's so strange, having grown up dyslexic and hating it and dreading it, that became my joy. But something else happened along the way. I realized that every time I picked up a book, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I think that's the gift of dyslexia. Dyslexic kids have great spatial apperception. They have a great ability to understand where all the pieces in the puzzle are moving, and almost innately understand how things work. And that gift is something that the parents of these young kids and teachers need to learn how to nurture. I spend a fair amount of my time talking to kids who have learning disabilities, especially dyslexia and ADD.
Well, I think it's great to hear that these kids know that a big-time writer and a successful writer like you had the very same problem that they're dealing with. And so I'm sure that's encouraging, and I know you are doing a lot to help with that. Now, the first book that you wrote, that you finally got together, you couldn't find a publisher for. And what happened then when you couldn't find your publisher?
Well, I struggled mightily to find someone to publish the book. Couldn't do it, but I always had a backup plan that I would self-publish my first book if I didn't get it done. And I had a unique experience of having been a sales and marketing specialist for Kraft General Foods. So I understood retail. I understood what it took to get a product on a shelf and how to get it marketed. So I threw together a business plan, brought some investors on board, sold 25% of the rights to Term Limits, my first book, for the next 7 years. And in August of 97, published 2,000 hardcovers. It went to number 1 in the Twin Cities. And then it got picked up by Pocket Books and Simon & Schuster in New York. And yes, they put it on the New York Times bestseller list in paperback. And I'm now what do we 12 years later.
Absolutely.
Book, same publisher, same editor, same agent, same wife. very happy. I don't like change, so.
Well, we're happy for you, and on that basis, we want to say good luck to you on your book tour. I know you've got a lot of area to cover, and we thank you for being here, and we want you to come back when you're ready with your next book. Okay?
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Okay.
I had a lot of fun.
Well, a lot of fun here, too. Thank you so much. This is the Jacqueline Bachar Show. I've been talking to Vince Flynn about his new book, Pursuit of Honor.